Hello, team players. Got another Ancestry video for you guys, this time talking about the Minotaur. Let's dive in. Unfortunately, Minotaurs get a lot of the same stereotypes that orcs do. As in, people see a Minotaur and they think, brute with no intelligence, which is hardly the case. In fact, most Minotaurs are holding themselves back quite a bit, so that they don't hurt their friends or loved ones, making them far from brutes. In addition, when it comes to the intelligence, Minotaurs might actually be better stonemasons than dwarves are, which is kinda nuts if you think about it. And although they're very stoic and don't really talk much, they're great crafters and problem solvers. Granted, the Minotaur ancestry does lend itself to martials, particularly rogues, believe it or not, which we'll talk about when we get to the mechanics of the Minotaur. But I could see them being melee witches or even magi. But those that can actually look past their appearance see quite a bit of really good stuff that helps the team. I do recommend the Minotaur ancestry for a lot of classes that you might not think they'd be good at. But let's talk mechanics, because that's what you guys are here for. So, Minotaurs do have 10 ancestry hit points, which makes sense for a large ancestry. However, I just found out something important. Minotaurs actually don't get reach, even though they are a large creature. So if you want reach, you are going to have to take a feat that I'll talk about later in this video. Minotaurs actually have pretty standard speed, 25 feet. That's what most ancestries get. So they're not particularly fast, but they're not slow either. And for attribute boosts, they get a boost to strength and constitution, as well as a free boost, as well as a flaw in charisma. This is mainly to represent how people perceive them, because, you know, Minotaurs do look like big, intimidating things. So the flaw in charisma is meant to signify that rather than their innate beauty. And of course, Minotaurs get 2 abilities. They have Dark Vision, which makes sense for a subterranean creature, and they have a Horns unarmed attack that deals 1d8 piercing damage and is in the Brawling Weapon group. There are feats in this ancestry later that use this Horns unarmed attack, which I will get to later in this video. And of course, like any ancestry, we have heritages to talk about. The first one is the Ghost Bull Minotaur heritage, which honestly I think looks really cool. But sadly, I don't think the heritage itself works all that well mechanically. You gain Know the Way as an innate cantrip, and get a +1 bonus on saving throws against the Confused condition. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's definitely okay. Know the Way can be pretty useful, especially at low levels. And the Confused condition can be pretty debilitating. However, Confused isn't a condition you're going to run into very often. More than likely, it's going to be frightened more than anything else. But it's still a decent heritage. I just wish it was a little bit better because they do look really cool. Next, we've got the Glacial Cavern Minotaur, which is your basic cold resistance heritage. Resistance to cold damage equal to half your level, and you treat environmental cold effects as 1 step less severe. A lot of the ancestors get a heritage similar to this, so it's pretty basic. But that doesn't mean it isn't good, it's kind of situational. But if you know you're going to run into a lot of cold effects, this could be the heritage for you. The Little Horn Minotaur heritage makes you medium instead of large. In addition, your horns attack only deals 1d6 damage, but it has the Agile trait. This one could definitely be useful. I mean, there are a lot of situations where a large Minotaur wouldn't be able to fit easily into certain spaces. So taking this would essentially allow you to do so, because you'd be medium and not large. And it gives your horns the agile trait, making them much better for multi-attacking. Could definitely be useful. Consider this one too. The next heritage we gotta talk about is the roaming Minotaur. You become trained in survival and gain the terrain expertise feat, which just gives you a bonus on your survival checks in certain terrains. In addition, if you're running into natural difficult terrain caused by uneven ground, you can ignore it when you're in the terrain you chose for terrain expertise. Pretty decent here. If you think you're going to run into a lot of difficult terrain from uneven ground, this could definitely be a heritage you might want to take. But in most situations, it's not going to be that great. But Rangers can take advantage of this. So if you're wanting to play a Minotaur Ranger, this could be the heritage for you. With the Slab Soul Minotaur heritage, you gain the 2-action Raise Slabs ability. Once per day, you can raise slabs of stone around you, and then you can knock them over. This deals 1d6 bludgeoning damage to all adjacent creatures with a basic reflex save against your class DC or spell DC, whichever is higher. If they critically fail the save, then they're also knocked prone. This one is pretty good because it gives enemies a reason not to be adjacent to you, and in addition, you knock them prone if they crit fail, which is pretty nice, especially for melee Minotaurs. However, the DC on this can go off your class DC or spell DC, which means it might be better for spellcasters than marshals. And this does lead to a pretty awesome feat later on. But we'll talk about that later. And the last heritage, but certainly not least, in fact, I consider this to be one of the best heritages here, is the Stalker Minotaur. You become trained in stealth and gain the Terrain Stalker skill feat. However, for this feat, you must select Rubble. In addition, this heritage allows you to sneak more than 10 feet without making a stealth check, rather than only 5 feet. This heritage, along with some other feats we're going to talk about later, make Minotaur rogues terrifying. I mean, really. Being able to move 10 feet with Terrain Stalker without making a stealth check is pretty darn awesome. We'll talk about the feats that are good for rogues later in this video, but the point is, Minotaur rogues are definitely a thing. So, if you're playing that, I highly recommend this heritage. Now let's talk about feats, starting with Artisanal Crafter. This goes into the whole idea of Minotaurs being good crafters. You become trained in crafting and get specialty crafting for blacksmithing, leatherworking, or stone masonry. If you don't know, that feat gives you a +1 bonus on any crafting checks involving whichever one of those 3 you picked. So if you're looking to be a crafter and you're not something like an inventor or an alchemist, this could be a feat you want to take. Cattle Speech allows you to basically talk to cattle, bison, pretty much any animal that is grazing that normally travels in herds. You can ask questions of, receive answers from, and even use diplomacy on these animals. The GM determines what animals actually qualify for this ability. However, personally, I'd allow you to talk to things like horses with this ability. In fact, I'd let you talk to a lot of beasts of burden. You should talk to your GM before taking this feat, but I do think there are a lot of animals you could talk to with this ability. With Eye for Masonry, you get a +2 bonus to notice unusual stonework. This can be traps made of stone, traps hidden within stone, or even secret doors that are in stone. In addition, if the target is a door made of stone, or a device made of stone, you can force it open or disable the device with a +1 circumstance bonus on the check. Basically, if it's made of stone, you get a +2 to see it. And if it's a door or a trap or something else made of stone, you get a +1 to force it open or disable the trap or pick the lock. Pretty freaking fantastic. Friendly Nudge is actually pretty nice for positioning. For one action, you attempt to shove an ally. Just kind of nudge them out of the way. You don't need a free hand to do this, and if the target is willing to be moved, you get 1 degree of success higher on your check than what you actually rolled. Because you're a big Minotaur, it might be difficult to get to certain spaces to attack an enemy. So, this says, I'm going to gently nudge you out of the way so I can move up and attack this enemy, which is honestly pretty great. This also really helps with positioning allies because they get to essentially take a step without actually using an action on their turn. This is great for rogues because you can push them into a position where it's at least easier for them to get a flanking with you, which is pretty darn nice. This also helps them not take reactive strikes or any other reaction that is based on movement, because this is forced movement, technically. So, this is a great feat here for positioning. I highly recommend this one for any Minotaur. Next we have Keen Nose, which gives you scent as an imprecise sense up to 30 feet. In addition, you gain a +1 bonus on Fortitude save specifically against effects that give you the sickened condition, but only olfactory effects. And basically, if it requires you to smell it, and it would give you the sickened condition, you get a +1 bonus on your fort save. Personally, I don't know why they didn't just make it all olfactory effects. Olfactory effects really aren't that common. I mean, they're a little more common now, but not that much. So, I don't think this feat would have been broken if they would have made it all olfactory effects. But this feat is still pretty good because having scent is actually pretty darn good, especially if you're trying to find hidden creatures. I do recommend this feat. I just wish the second part applied to all olfactory effects rather than just ones that give you the second condition. Next, we've got two pretty basic feats here with Minotaur lore to start with. You become trained in Society and Stealth, and gain additional lore for Minotaur lore. So, in other words, your Minotaur lore is going to go up as you level up. Stealth is actually pretty good for Minotaurs. I understand why they gave Minotaur Stealth as part of Minotaur lore. But this is just your basic lore feat that every ancestry gets. Then we've got Minotaur Weapon Familiarity, which again is just your basic weapon familiarity feat that a lot of ancestries get. Not all of them, but a lot of them. It applies to battle axes, falchions, glaives, and great axes. And of course, at 5th level, you get the crit specialization effect of these weapons. But there's no clause about Minotaur weapons, because as far as I know, there aren't any. And I think that's a shame, because Minotaurs are good at crafting, so they should be able to craft their own weapons. But right now, there are no Minotaur weapons, which means that clause is useless here. At least as far as I know. And finally, for level 1 feats, we have Pantheon Magic, which is kind of a weird one because Minotaurs don't really like divine magic, but it does say that divine magic runs through you whether you want it to or not. This just gives you a divine cantrip as an innate spell. Again, that's a pretty basic feat here. But the divine list does have some good cantrips. For example, Forbidding Ward would be amazing on a Minotaur champion. But anyway, that's pretty much all the feats for level 1. For level 5, Alarming Disappearance is probably the best feat here. Especially if you're a class that wants to be stealthy. If you are reserved, and you successfully hide, then creatures you are hidden from become frightened 1. But then they're immune to this feat for 1 hour. I personally love this feat because it's basically the Minotaur disappears and everybody loses their minds. I think this is definitely a flavorful feat for rogues and any other class that wants to be stealthy. Even if you can't take advantage of the frightened condition, your allies can. Although you do have to be careful with this because if your allies can't see you, they're affected by this as well. So keep that in mind. Next up is Beast of Burden. You increase your maximum and encumbered bulk lips by 4. And you can rest normally in medium armor. It's flat out insane for out of combat. I mean, literally, you can rest in your medium armor, which means you'll never be caught without your armor while you're resting. And not only that, increasing your bulk limits by 4 is nuts. I mean, really. That essentially means you can carry 2 great axes more than you could normally, which is downright nuts. If you've got a party who likes to hoard a lot of stuff, this is a feat you want to take. Otherwise, you might want to skip this one because, to be honest, you're never going to need that much bulk unless your party likes to hoard stuff. Next, we've got Labyrinthine Echoes, which I get what they were going for with this feat, but to be honest, it's not a good feat. You get Ventriloquism as an innate spell once per day, and at 7th level, you can cast it at 2nd rank. Again, I get what they were going for, but to be honest, Ventriloquism isn't that good of a spell. I mean, there's a lot of all the out-of-combat stuff you can do with it, but I'm not a fan of this feat. Natural Orienteering. If you roll a success on a survival check to sense direction or track, you get a critical success instead. I like this feat especially for certain campaigns. I mean, being able to sense direction and track, much better. If you're a Minotaur Ranger, this is pretty much a must-take. Of course, it's not going to be helpful all the time, but when it does come up, it's going to be incredibly useful. Especially if you're needing to track somebody or you get lost. I do recommend this feat for Minotaur Rangers. Puzzle Solver is probably the best feat here at level 5. Once per hour, when you roll a Recall Knowledge check against a subject or creature, you get a +1 bonus on your next skill check against that subject or creature, even if you don't succeed on the Recall Knowledge. If you're a master in the skill you're using for Recall Knowledge, then this bonus is +2. This is insane. This is literally another incentive to use Recall Knowledge. Because even if you fail, you get a +1 on your next skill check on that subject. So, you can use this with athletics, or, try another Recall Knowledge with a +1 bonus, or +2 if you're a master. This is a fantastic feat that I highly recommend if you want to focus on Recall Knowledge. And the last feat at level 5 is Stretching Reach. If you're wielding a two-handed weapon that doesn't already have reach, you can use an interact action to switch between your normal grip and a grip that gives you a 10-foot reach. A lot of people look at this feat and they seem like they think that you can't start off with the extended reach when you start combat. I disagree with this. I think number 1, that's dumb, and number 2, it says you can switch between the two. That means you could technically start with the extended reach grip, because otherwise it's just really convoluted. If you want reach, this is the feat to take, but it's really not that great of a feat, to be honest with you. I mean, it's just a feat that gives you reach and allows you to switch between reach and not reach, which doesn't really do anything. So, this feat is a mess, but if you want reach, this is the feat you need to take. Okay, for level 9, I'm not a huge fan of Friendly Fling. To be honest, this is just, you pick somebody up with your horns, and then fling them 20 feet. This makes them land on their feet, and not take any fall damage, but they do take 1d6 damage from your horns. Because you're using your horns, you don't need a free hand for this, and the ally does not trigger reactions. If they end their movement within melee reach of an enemy, they can make a strike as a reaction. This is literally just friendly toss from the barbarian class, but with downsides that friendly toss does not have. And one upside. The upside is you don't need a free hand to do this, which is honestly pretty good. But friendly toss is a 30 feet throw, which is better, and they don't take damage from your horns. I personally would rather, if you want to take something like this, I would rather take friendly toss than this. So, you know, if you're not a barbarian and you want to do something like this, go ahead and take this. But honestly, I'm not a huge fan of this feat. Now, I know that friendly toss is a barbarian feat, which means it's legacy content. But the barbarian is about to get remastered, so maybe we'll get a remastered version later. But in my opinion, this is just a worse friendly toss. Next, we've got Goring Charge, which is another feat I'm not a huge fan of. You stride twice and then make a horns attack. If you moved at least 20 feet, you deal an additional 1d6 persistent bleed damage. Honestly, I think this is just a worse version of Sudden Charge. I mean, it requires a horn unarmed attack, which all Minotaurs do get. However, with Sudden Charge, you can use any weapon. Even any unarmed attack. It doesn't matter. You just make a strike. And the 1d6 persistent bleed damage, again, that's just damage. It's good damage, and it does make the enemy possibly waste an action to get rid of it, but that doesn't happen too often. So I'm not a big fan of this feat. Now, there is a feat later on that is a much better version of this, but we'll talk about that later in this video. Next, we have Siphon Torment. You gain Claim Curse as a Divine Innate spell. When you cast it, the target gains temporary hit points equal to your level. Honestly, I am a fan of this feat because Claim Curse lets you take a curse onto yourself for 5 minutes, which is a good teamwork thing to do. And the temporary hit points do help. However, curses I found are actually pretty rare. So, I don't think you're going to use this feat very often. It's one of those niche feats that's really good when you need it, but you're not going to need it much. And the final feat for level 9 is Stone Passage, which requires the Slabstone Minotaur Heritage. Once per hour, you can stride. While doing so, you can move through stone and rock areas as if they were unoccupied spaces. However, if you end your movement in a space that you couldn't normally occupy, you get shunted back to the nearest unoccupied space you moved through. This is one of those feats that is absolutely terrifying. Just a Minotaur walking through walls. It's literally the walk through walls cheat, except only stone and rock. But honestly, I wish this feat wasn't locked behind the Slabstone Minotaur Heritage. This would be insane on a Stalker Minotaur. I mean, think about it. You're good at stealth, and you can just walk through walls. That would be amazing. In fact, honestly, I would take the Slabstone Minotaur Heritage just for this feat if I was playing a rogue. Because it's literally, you are in a room, observed, and then you can just walk through walls and be on the other side of a stone wall, and now all of a sudden you're hidden from enemies. This feat is amazing with alarming disappearance. So, for level 13, we're going to start with a pretty good feat with Phantom Charm. It's a free action that you can use once per day, but it does require you to be the Ghost Bull Minotaur Heritage. Once per day, if you would roll a check that is going to be affected by a misfortune effect, you can pretty much say, yeah, no to that, and get a +2 bonus on the check as well. This effectively means a Ghost Bull Minotaur that takes this feat wants to get affected by a misfortune effect once per day. Because they can just say no to that and get a +2 bonus on whatever they're trying to do. And honestly, if this feat had come out a year ago, before Dark Archive came out, I would have said this feat is pretty bad because misfortune effects weren't that common back then. But then Dark Archive came out and that changed. Now, misfortune effects are actually pretty common, so this is a good feat. Next we have Shift the Little Ones, which is the next feat up in the Friendly Nudge feat tree. You do need to be an expert in athletics to take this, but it essentially is a better stride. You can stride, and if you end your movement in an area where your allies are occupying the spaces, you can give them a free action that lets them step. They must move in a way that they're no longer in the space that you are in. If they can't for some reason, then you need to end your movement in a space that is not occupied by allies as normal. This one is really good because it's just an enhanced stride. But remember, it only works with strides. So if you're swimming, climbing, whatever else, you can't use this feat. This right here is just a better version of Friendly Nudge, because they can step as a free action and not a reaction, which is a big deal. This feat is going to be used a lot if you get to level 13, because it can really help with positioning as well, if you use it right. To take Threatening Pursuit, you must be an expert in both Intimidation and Stealth. And in order to use it, you must not be observed by any enemies within 60 feet. You attempt an Intimidation check to demoralize all enemies within 60 feet. You do not take a penalty for the creatures not understanding your language. If the targets are in a maze or a similarly difficult location to navigate, you get a +2 bonus on this Intimidation check, and the range increases to 60 feet. However, once you use this on a group of enemies, they are immune for 1 hour. Level 13 is an amazing level for Minotaurs, and with this feat, Minotaur Rogue is looking more and more attractive, as you simply have to be not observed in order to use this feat. Which means you can be hidden, undetected, whatever. Although, if you use this when you're undetected, you aren't undetected anymore. But hey, you know, this is still a pretty terrifying feat for a rogue. And now we finally come to level 17 and begin Stampede. This is pretty much the Goring Charge feat I talked about earlier, except with one major difference. Instead of doing extra persistent damage if you stride more than 20 feet, you can instead allow all allies who saw you hit within 60 feet to use a reaction to stride up to twice their speed. But they must end their movement closer to you than when they started. In addition, each such ally that does use a reaction to stride gets a +1 circumstance bonus on their first strike of their turn. This is infinitely better than Goring Charge. You're basically giving all allies the chance to stride twice as a reaction. If they do use the stride, they do have to be closer to you than when they started, but this effectively means you can get all your marshals up at once, and the spellcasters can stay in the back. Infinitely better than Goring Charge, and the +1 bonus on their first strike of the round is also pretty insane. I highly recommend this feat. It is less versatile than Sudden Charge because you have to use a horn attack, But what this feat does is highly worth the less versatility. With Into the Labyrinth, you can cast Quandary as an innate divine spell once per day at 8th rank. However, instead of a puzzle room, this takes the form of a labyrinth. In addition, the targets cannot use occultism to escape the spell, as normal for Quandary, but instead must use survival to find their way through the labyrinth. But they can still use the other ways of escaping the spell, such as perception or thievery. The amazing thing about Quandary is that there's no saving throw for the initial part of the spell. Instead, they have to make one of those checks against your spell DC to escape the spell. This effectively means you're taking an enemy out of the combat for at least one of their actions. And the best part is, this spell does not have the incapacitation trait, which means you can take a boss completely out of the fight for at least one of its actions, which is downright nuts. But that does make sense because this spell doesn't require a saving throw. They have to use a skill check instead. So if you're facing a boss that is dumb, you might be able to keep them in there for a good long time. And it's sustained. Not even sustained for 1 minute. As long as you sustain the spell, they are stuck in there unless they escape. This feat is absolutely insane because you can put this on a non-spellcaster. This seems like another really good feat for rogues. But this is one that if you get to level 17, I would consider for all characters. This is just a non-saving throw. I get rid of someone for at least one action. And that's the Minotaur. To be honest, there are a lot of classes that the Minotaur can pull off pretty effectively. I can think of, well, literally any martial that's strength-based, rogues, especially ruffian rogues, and even some spellcasters, which I honestly didn't expect. But if you guys enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a like, and do all that other YouTube stuff. Comment, subscribe, you know, all that stuff. And if you want my videos early, or other perks, you can check out my Patreon page or become a member of this channel. And if you're interested in the Awakened Animal ancestry, you can check out this video here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.